On behalf of the City of St. Louis Park, I just want to express how thrilled we are about this project commencing. This project represents a great partnership between the City of St. Louis Park and the Watershed District, something that we've been working on for a very long time.
It has the highest pollutant load per unit area of anywhere on the 22-mile stream. And a lot of that is based on just the historical land use changes that occurred post-World War II. The stream was just a ditch running kind of northwest up to Louisiana, and then again continuing northwest, and then just these straight segments where it had been moved so they could construct a lot of the surrounding landscape.
These changes have increased the water and pollution that's being delivered to Minnehaha Creek, downstream Lake Hiawatha and the Mississippi River, as well as eliminated in-stream habitat. As a result, Minnehaha Creek and Lake Hiawatha are listed on the state's impaired waters list for fish, chlorides, and nutrients.
We're changing that. We want to turn towards the creek and view it as an asset versus a liability or just another utility.
This project, in combination with others, will slow that runoff down, hold it on the landscape.
The City of St. Louis Park had contacted the Watershed District about a section of Minnehaha Creek that was channelized that had some erosion issues on the banks. And we kind of turned around and saw the Methodist site and this great restored natural stream system, and the discussion evolved from there into, well, why don't we attempt to do something like that?
Back in 2002, we were talking about expanding, and we were going to build a heart and vascular center. The Watershed District said, you know, you guys are building this healing environment, and we actually have this kind of sick wetland here that we'd like to kind of heal. What if we partner together and create something that works for you and it works for us?
Methodist Hospital embraced the whole idea and participated so willingly with us that it became a tremendous success.
The view of nature makes a difference.
Thank you.
There are fewer days of hospitalization, there are fewer complications, and people heal faster. We could not have done this on our own, so it was a valued partnership. I love the fact that it's growing. I love the fact that it started here. Looking forward to having it linked to other areas.
This project really helps accomplish two major goals that we have in our community. One relates to better connecting our community through means other than using cars, like sidewalks, or in this case, trails.
There's a paved trail that will be able to take bikers or higher speed people all the way through. And there's many spots where you can connect back onto the slower, more scenic routes.
Secondly, this really is very exciting for us because of the environmental benefits.
We created a couple of stormwater facilities that take over 80 acres of the surrounding runoff and direct them through two pond systems and then allow them to slowly overflow into the project area wetland. We added a lot of woody debris, so we wanted to create an area for refuge for smaller fish and invertebrates. And we also added spawning habitat.
This is going to be an observation pavilion. There's going to be some signage. There'll be a set of steps coming down just so you can kind of get down and see some of the nature.
All right, listen up.
Over the summer, we had a wonderful program about science and about our community, so we were able to take a lot of nature walks down in this area, looking at different trees and finding out what kind of animals live here and the different plants that are in the water. Nature is really important to learning and fresh air.
And what can you do with them?
Before the boardwalk was here, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of trees down there. I never really gave it a second thought. And now it's, you know, part of our daily life.
We opened here in August of 2010. We felt it was important to come into this area and help revitalize it. We have our patio out here. You know, we want the area to look nice. And as you improve the creek, the local residents as well will start taking note of that. Their properties will start looking better.
We are a watershed that has been built up by and large, and we can accommodate the built environment, and the built environment can be enhanced by the natural environment.
We're looking forward to the cold storage area being turned into a green space and more retail or apartments, whatever.
We've been able to start to plan and design and even build projects upstream, really trying to address comprehensively the issue that was going on in the area.
The partners, especially the private partners, see the value in enhancing the natural resources. It has positive impact on the value of their property. And of course the greater community sees more tax base.
This has turned out much better than I had expected. With this project, people are actually going to be able to see the creek, experience the creek, and not actually have to be physically in the creek with a canoe. We couldn't be more thrilled with being able to partner with the Watershed District on making this become a reality.
We're very Minnesotan about our lakes, meaning that we want all lakes to be all things to all people. And they really don't work that way. I think in some lakes they're so shallow that you can't support certain types of uses. And this is not a popular discussion in the state right now. A shallow lake is defined by the regulators as any lake that's less than 15 feet deep, or more than 80% of the lake is less than 15 feet deep. And that's important because at 15-foot depth, light would penetrate down to the sediments. You would expect plant growth.
Well, shallow lakes have a different dynamic because they don't what they call turnover because they aren't deep water lakes. Deep water lakes have a cold layer and a warm layer, and in the fall when the seasons change, it tends to recycle. Deep lakes tend to be cleaner because they can kind of segregate that higher nutrient colder water during the summer. And shallow lakes get warm throughout. They have a lot of lake turbulence because even wind can turn over the water, and so all those nutrients that are stuck in the lake sediments resuspend. So not only do you have phosphorus and sediment and all these nutrients washing into the lake, there's also all these lake sediments that recirculate and cause really high levels of phosphorus, particularly in our area, that causes algae blooms and feed the lake plants.
We've lived in this area for about 15 years. I think that people don't know the classification of the lake that they live on. Understanding the ecology of a shallow lake, I have understood it, but not necessarily my husband. So we've had some healthy conversation about what is a reasonable expectation of recreation on a shallow lake. He's purely interested in water skiing. So I think that overall as a community, we are all concerned about the health of our lakes. It's our property values, it's where kids swim. So we are very interested in being educated.
Well, people go up to the North Shore or go up north and they see these beautiful clear lakes. They're big and they can swim on it. They're sandy shorelines. But I've talked to a lot of people that have bought houses on shallow lakes with that expectation that it's going to be an up north lake, and then come to realize it's a very different characteristic than what they were expecting. Too much vegetation, I can't swim in it, I can't fish in it. I mean, that's what we hear a lot. So we're often asked to manage a shallow lake to a clear water state with a sandy bottom and no vegetation. And what I tell people is you need a swimming pool, right? Because that's really not what shallow lakes support.
We're charged as a watershed district and other local governments to meeting state water quality standards. We had to think about how can we clarify these lakes? How can we get clear so plants can survive and can be more healthy habitat? Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District is now very urban, but looking back to the 1940s, the district was primarily agriculture. There was a higher level of accumulation and more phosphorus was accumulating in those sediments during those ag periods. And all the sediments go into these shallow lakes and just kind of accumulate, and they hold those sediments. We had to look at how can we sequester those nutrients into sediment and not let them resuspend so easily. We also saw that there was large populations of carp in some of these lakes. Working with the university, we developed a way to try to identify how many carp are there. Is the population too high that the system can't support it? Then how can we remove them?
Well, if you have too many carp, really what they do is they just root in the bottom or dig in the bottom looking for food. So it's a very simple process by which they disturb lakes. So they disturb the sediment and essentially they uproot aquatic vegetation. So there's no way vegetation can grow in those lakes. If you don't have any vegetation in the lake, then the water turns green because all of those nutrients are used by algae. If you net enough of them, then the lakes pretty much change immediately. The lake is clear and there's a lot of vegetation in the lake. So it doesn't take long for the lakes to come back.
The reason the lake was free of plants previously was that the lake was so cloudy and such poor water quality that the plants couldn't grow. But then you have an algae-dominated system where you have dangerous and awful algae blooms throughout part of the year.
The alternative is green lakes with a lot of algae.
Shallow lakes exist in two states, and this is the difference between a deep lake. They either want to be in a turbid, algae-dominated lake where the water is really green or brown, there's not a lot of vegetation, it's not good for wildlife, it's not good for fish, and that's what we call the turbid water state. Or they want to be in a clear water state that's dominated by plants. And so in that case, you have clear water, lots of aquatic vegetation, not much algae, but you can get vegetation that breaks to the surface. It's going to be fairly thick that's in there. The lake doesn't want to exist in between those two states. It wants to be one and the other. What we have is a ball and cup diagram, and in a ball and cup diagram, what it's showing are the two different states that we have shallow lakes in. Now often what people want is they want us to manage the lake for a clear water state with no vegetation. Well, what you're asking us to do is to take the ball and balance it on the top. The ball wants to fall either into a turbid water state or a clear water state. It's very difficult to maintain it there. So that's kind of the impossible task of a lake manager or shallow lake manager, is to keep it in that condition.
I think what people like is the clear water or clean water in the lake, but I think a lot of people are a bit surprised by the amount of aquatic vegetation that is growing in lakes once you remove the carp, right? And I think that that's a natural state. In shallow lakes, there normally should be a lot of aquatic vegetation. But because there's so many carp in lakes, people have gotten used to shallow lakes without vegetation, right? So this is sort of like the new norm. People look at shallow lakes and they normally see no veg. So I think that's the way it's supposed to be, but it's actually not true. We see this over and over that whenever carp are removed from lakes, people are a little surprised that, wow, there is all of a sudden all this vegetation growing in the lake.
They're more challenging to manage, absolutely. I think, but that's the fun part. And it's not just a matter of managing one component, say total phosphorus, it's a matter of managing and balancing the fish and the plants with that, and then really bringing in the user.
A lot of what happens in a lake system is Mother Nature, so to speak. Man has manipulated the system a lot in the past, but we're trying to get the system back to something that's more of a sustainable system that's good for the majority of the population, not just for lakeshore residents.
You start with saying, what do you want out of your lake? You have to start there. If you understand that, then you can say, okay, this is what the lake can support. Now how do we try to find the crossover to the maximum extent we can, and then work from there?
The district does look at both sides. We try to figure out what do the lakeshore owners want and how can that fit in with the management programs that we have in place, and how can we alter what we do to better accommodate their needs as well as maintain water quality, and also look at the taxpayers of the entire district. Everybody's paying for this stuff. We've addressed what we feel is our primary job, and that is improving water quality, and we've done that. We're trying to wrestle with how is water quality management connected with recreation, and if there is a direct connection, we've said, okay, we should be somewhat involved in managing that.
So we can balance some of those things. If the lake has some deep areas, you can use aquatic plant harvesting techniques, you can use herbicides, you can clear certain areas while you're trying to balance the necessary ecological benefits of the vegetation community while also supporting some of those uses. There are tools in the toolbox to do this. The challenge is they're expensive.
Probably will get more involved in it, but at this point the question is exactly what do we do? We obviously can't let the lake go back to what it was, and that would be decreasing water quality, and that's something that isn't acceptable.
I think people should care about clean water in lakes, because we've really had a strong impact on lakes, especially in cities and in agricultural areas over the last few decades. I mean, really strong negative effect. So now we can do some things to restore those lakes.
People really tend to focus on their direct use of that lake, and I understand that. We're Minnesotans, we love our lakes, we want to use them. And we tend to focus on, can I swim in it, can I fish in it, can I boat in it? But I think that really overlooks some of the great benefits that other shallow lakes or shallow lakes that don't support those uses have in terms of wildlife habitat, flood control, water quality, and really aesthetics.
It's not only about vegetation coming back to the lake, right? But that creates habitat for fish, and ducks and all kinds of other creatures. We know that native fish, for example, grow faster in lakes with more vegetation. So clear water is good and vegetation is good.
I think it just takes a lot of education, and I think it helped them understand what their lake can support. So we're on Lake Riley, which is on the border of Eden Prairie and the city of Chanhassen, and this project is for the Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District. And we're applying aluminum sulfate, it's also known as alum, to bind up phosphorus in the sediments so that it doesn't release up into the water column and cause more algae blooms. So to understand why we use alum, we first need to talk a little bit about phosphorus. Phosphorus is a limiting nutrient for algae growth. Okay, and so if you have more phosphorus in the lake, that's what causes more algae to grow and the lake gets greener. This is a project that was done by the Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District as part of an overall restoration for this chain of lakes. So what you do is it's aluminum that goes down into the sediments, it binds that phosphorus and it permanently stays into the sediments so that it no longer can grow algae. So we go out, we test the sediments, figure out how much to put in there, and then we apply that alum so that we don't have that phosphorus release to grow algae.
So they dumped this stuff and we'd build it up. We told them, now you're going to have to start dropping truckloads here on the upper fill. Everybody pitched in. We had a 24-hour guard. Had that come over, boom, the whole thing would have went down.
The Great Cloud Crossing originally was a timber bridge back in the early 1900s. About 1923 is when the culverts went in and there was fill placed across there to create the causeway. And then in 1965, when the flood came, that's when they had to raise the road and the culverts were essentially buried and crushed.
1965, I was the chairman of the town board. We knew it was coming. We river folks knew it because we had tremendous snowpacks up north. And then we had a quick thaw. And it ruined the place because you couldn't swim in it, you couldn't boat in it.
There's no flowing water there, so it just becomes very stagnant. So we have very, very low, if any, oxygen levels. So there's really no fish habitat there, and the algae blooms take over.
Then the zebra mussels came in, and they were a pain on the bottom of boats and docks and everything.
It's infested with invasive species as far as plant growth.
But this weed thing just absolutely destroyed it down here, so something had to be done.
And so by reconnecting to the main river and re-establishing that flow, we hope to improve the water quality to the point that oxygen levels come back, the algae won't bloom, we get good water quality in there, we'll be able to change the plant habitat and really restore the habitat back there for fisheries and other aquatic life. In the early 2000s, Township had a couple of reports done by some master students at the University of Minnesota. It's called a capstone project that they do. So those projects really kind of spurred on the effort to get this project rolling. We've got support from all the agencies, National Park Service, the Corps of Engineers, DNR, PCA, everybody. It's a state water trail, it's a national park. You know, you don't see a project like this where everybody agrees very often. We looked at 3 different options as far as the project. We looked at a small culvert connection, we looked at a large culvert connection, and we looked at a bridge connection. So the bridge is the plan. It creates the largest amount of flow, which gives us the largest footprint of ecological and aquatic habitat restoration back there. We're using a precast span segment. It provides that access. We get all the transportation benefits. We'll actually be raising the road 1 more foot of freeboard for high water events. But it also brings along the secondary benefits of navigation. So people will be able to get through there with a boat.
And the theory is that we get a flow in here and the weeds will go down and they will not get the sunlight and eventually gone.
And so that we have good clean water for fish habitat and other shorebirds and things like that. By restoring that flow, we're looking at approximately 100 acres of aquatic habitat and about 5 miles of shoreline restoration that we think we'll achieve.
The watershed covers just about 500 square miles. It starts up at Sand Hill Lake and goes to the city of Climax. So it covers, Winger, Thurtle, Beltrami, Climax, and Neelsville. Kind of a long, narrow one. We're sandwiched in between the Wild Rice Watershed District on the south and the Red Lake Watershed on the north of us. Watersheds were established in 1955 by an act of the state legislature. And if you look through them and read them, you will find that just about anything to do with water is included in there.
We were able to secure $500,000 to work on the Sand Hill, to put in rock riffles, and to also more or less deconstruct the dams.
Basically what we did is put rock drop structures into the channel to help stabilize the grade line, so we would just reduce the head cutting.
The riffles benefit people in the matter of kayaking, safety, fishing.
And it was kind of cool to see it start coming to life as I moved into this role as the district engineer for Sand Hill, and then actually get to see it through construction.
Just completed like yesterday, which would be June 2nd, 2017, the restoration of the core drop structures that are out west of town here about 5 miles. They were made to keep the channel from eroding.
I see a lot of potential with the Sand Hill Watershed District and the Soil and Water District, West Polk Soil and Water District. There's a lot more that we can do on the Sand Hill River.
It's a constant education of those people to try to show them what really happens here and what's really important here to us.
I think that things are going really well working with the SWCDs.
To take and get ahead of the curve and try to keep people informed so that, there's good people in these jobs and there's good decisions made.
I think that's leading to more and more of a collaborative approach on a lot of these projects. So I think there's just a lot of exciting things that are coming up in the next 3 to 4 years for the Watershed District.
Surrounded by festivals, fireworks, and families, Normandale Lake is a summertime staple. But you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at it.
Normandale Lake is a very shallow lake, so the average depth is only 3 feet deep. And so this allows plants to grow throughout the lake, which people probably have noticed is one of the issues we hear a lot about.
Between the algae and the smell, it's no secret this body of water could use a makeover. And the time to do it is finally here.
We're going to be drawing down the lake this fall, and we're going to try to freeze out the curly leaf pondweed that is growing in the lake. Right now it kind of outcompetes all the other weeds and vegetation in the lake.
The goal by the end of the fall is to have the lake essentially drained for the winter. Once snow melt starts to happen, we will kind of close the outlet pipe and we'll fill the lake back up. And so once the lake's filled back up, we still expect to have some of the curly leaf pondweed in the lake, especially in the parts of the lake that are a little bit deeper. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be doing an herbicide treatment of the lake to kill the remaining curly leaf pondweed.
The whole process will be done by pumping water out and installing a pipe to help it drain. A small channel of water will remain since 9 Mile Creek runs through it. A big undertaking with little disruption.
We are going to make sure that at least one lane of the trail stays open at all times. And if for some reason the construction activity that's going on precludes that, we'll give advance notice of what's being done and when the trail will be closed. But we don't anticipate it to be a huge problem.
Good news for humans who love the lake. And don't worry, animals are being taken into account too.
One of the things we're going to do for the turtles is start the drawdown in mid-August, which gives us plenty of time for the turtles to move out of the area. And what we'll do is we'll put up fencing along the lake and steer them to the points where we want them to go, so they're not crossing any of the major roads and getting hit. The fish should survive just fine in the shallow water that remains once we draw things down.
And while the city and watershed district are taking big steps to improve the water quality here, there's ways you can help out too.
By adopting a drain and cleaning this debris up, you can keep it out of our lakes and creek and help keep our lakes and creeks clean. So there's a website that you can go to, adoptadrain.org, and you can adopt a drain.
Because even though Normandale Lake will be full of water again next summer, the work won't be over.
There's going to be an ongoing effort in coming years to do additional herbicide treatments.
The district's also been busy doing work upstream in the upstream watershed. There's been a lot of work in the last couple of decades done up there to reduce the amount of sediment and phosphorus that gets to the creek and is transported to Normandale Lake.
It's always going to support a healthy plant population that grows throughout the lake. But our goals of this project are to reduce the amount of phosphorus in the lake and reduce the population of curly-leaf pondweed. And so by doing this, we will make the lake healthier, and we hope to address some of the issues that people see that they don't like, the amount of algae and some of the odor issues. So in the end, we do hope to make the lake a better place.
And a better backdrop for all your favorite summer activities.
Geez, Normandale Lake is so gross. It's all the algae.
I know, and that smell, ugh, it's the curly leaf pondweed. How embarrassing.
It's just so hard, you know. None of the other plants like me. I know I have growth issues. I take over every space that I'm in. But it just seems like everyone's out to get me.
We sure are. The City of Bloomington
And the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District are working together to improve Normandale Lake.
and get rid of curly leaf pondweed.
We're going to drain all the water out of Normandale Lake, let the invasive plants freeze,
And the creek will fill it back up, and it'll look
and smell better.
So pack your bags, pondweed.
You're out of here.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill.
Water quality.
A mindless eating machine.
Otherwise known as... In 2002, Spring and Upper Prior Lake were listed on the Minnesota's list of impaired waters. As a result, the district put together an integrated pest management plan, or IPM, for common carp in 2017 to reduce the carp population and help restore our impaired waters. Did you know that common carp are one of the most damaging aquatic invasive species due to their wide distribution and severe impacts in shallow lakes and wetlands? Their feeding disrupts shallowly rooted plants, muddying the water and releasing phosphorus that increases algae abundance.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
I am implanting this fish with a radio tag. We use these radio tags to identify where these fish go in the springtime, in the summertime, fall, and then in the winter. What we're doing right now, we found them yesterday in the seine hall and had our commercial fishermen come out to capture them. These tags will last about 3 years, and we'll keep track of every fish that we tag. This radio tag carp aggregation map tells us where the carp are located in order to have a carp seine. How we calculate a population estimate from catching, marking, and releasing carp goes as follows.
Say you catch 6 carp in the first capture. You mark all 6, then release them. Then you capture 9 carp the second capture, 2 of which you already marked from the first capture. You take the first catch times the second catch and divide that number by the marked carp you caught in the second capture, and that gives you your population estimate of 26 carp. There are certain requirements that need to be met in order to have a carp seine. This includes having thick enough ice, warm outside temperatures so the native fish aren't in danger while sorting, carp conjugated in one place, commercial fishermen ready with their nets, and there has to be an existing market for the fish to be sent after removal. All of these factors are extremely hard to accomplish at the same time, but are essential to a successful carp seine. The fisherman first starts out by cutting a large hole in the water, which then he drops the net in. The top of the net has floaters and the bottom of the net has weights. He then drills 2 smaller holes on either side of the first initial large hole and grabs the net and pushes it through the hole with a stick. He then pulls the net out of the small drilled holes and repeats this process until he gets close to the shoreline. He then drills another large hole in the water located by the shoreline, cinches the net, and pulls both sides of the net through. This system makes a wall, and when the fishermen pull the net through the larger hole located by the shoreline, the fish will be trapped and pulled up through the hole otherwise known as the seine haul.
Don't give up! Keep swimming! Just keep swimming! That's it!
I'm sure you're wondering what happens to the native fish when they get caught in the net with the carp. Well, they get taken out quickly and get thrown back into the lake to ensure their survival.
So they're hauling up the fish in a net, right like that, dumping it on the table, and then they sort them into different sizes. The big ones and the small ones go to different markets.
During the 2018 seine, carp were sent in a live well truck to markets on the East Coast, along with game fishing markets in the South.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
I'll be back.
Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District's goal is to reduce the carp population in district waters to below 100 kilograms per hectare. When the population is below that level, it is thought that the carp aren't as damaging. The district will be working to keep the carp population under control so everyone can enjoy what the Prior Lake Watershed has to offer.
I think water's beautiful for a lot of reasons. It's carved out our landscape.
The way it shines and it is brilliant, and water evokes a lot of feelings of calm and serenity and peace.
There have been people here where we are for 8,000 years, and so there have been stories about the river. Our history, our society here in St. Paul is all focused on the river in different ways.
Back in 1998, citizens around Como Lake were very concerned about the decline in water quality in the lake, and so they petitioned the state to create the Capital Region Watershed District. We're about 40 square miles, and it's comprised of parts of the city of St. Paul, Maplewood, Roseville, Falcon Heights, and Lauderdale. Our district is about 40% impervious cover, so it's very challenging. All the water that falls from the sky isn't able to always soak into the ground, and it collects pollutants and sediment and other debris as it goes to the river and causes pollution. We have over 1,200 projects that have been built in the last 10 years within the district. They help clean up over 250 million gallons a year. That's making a huge difference.
The Trail Brook Storm Sewer System plays a very important role within the 40 square miles of Capital Region Watershed District. It is an over 6-mile long pipe that stretches from Como Lake in St. Paul and Lake McCarran's in Roseville. It is the system that takes the rainwater that falls on the land and puts it underground and safely conveys it to the Mississippi River eventually. It's really important to maintain the integrity of the Trail Brook Storm Sewer System. It's over 100 years old, and it's amazing that it is still intact and functioning properly. We're filling in the places where there are gaps in the mortar between the limestone blocks of the tunnel and adding a liner to certain sections to ensure that it holds its shape and can convey water.
It's really important that we work with our communities and residents. The Watershed District can't do this alone. We need residents to help do their part. Everyone affects the land and the water, so we need residents to help out and not use too much salt or fertilizer to pick up dog waste, maybe keep their storm drain clean.
When you let any soil come down to the street and that water runs into the storm drain that's on the corner, that water goes directly to the Mississippi. And all of that ends up downstream, ends up in Iowa, it ends up in Missouri, it ends up in Arkansas and out into the Gulf of Mexico. So we have this responsibility to the world, really. My family has been connected to the river since the 1870s. My great-grandfather came up north on this great highway, the Mississippi River. And then I lived literally a block away from the river in Lower Town for 11 years. We all have this responsibility to this great watershed and to the generations that follow us.
We need to take care of all of our water. It's not just any one city's water or communities, it's all of our water.